I'm gonna get you for it, Marshal.
You couldn't get me in the back, how are you gonna get me face on? Why don't you just give up?
When we talk about classic television series, Gunsmoke is one that readily comes to mind, being one of the longest-running TV shows on CBS, with a legacy that has lived on for generations. However, even legends do have their periods of slips, which sometimes go unnoticed for long periods. Though many of the viewers might not have paid attention to these slips, it can be quite a pain for more conscious viewers. Today, we have gathered some of these interesting bloopers from Gunsmoke, some of which were way off than anyone would have imagined. But first, let's talk a little about the legend of the show. Sit tight as we take you through the annals of television history. Gunsmoke was first introduced as a radio series in 1952 and went on to become arguably the most iconic of American Western dramas. Set in Dodge City, Kansas in the late 19th century, the program followed the character of U.S. Marshal Matt Dillon as he policed and kept order in this often unruly frontier town. The radio series created by Norman Macdonnell and John Meston came replete with brutal realism and multi-dimensional characters, totally opposite of the largely known version of the Old West. William Conrad voiced Matt Dillon for the radio series Gunsmoke. He was joined by Parley Bear as his steadfast friend and sidekick Chester, Georgia Ellis played the saloon owner Kitty Russell, and Howard McNear played the town's quirky doctor, Doc Adams. The show did very well with the quality of its writing and valiantly handled darker, mature themes that were not found within other westerns at the time. In 1955, CBS decided to bring Gunsmoke to television. On paper, this should have been an easy thing to do. There was already a series in production, actors, and scripts. Of course, the producers instead chose to use more conventionally Western-looking actors for the television series than had been used on the radio series. William Conrad had been Matt Dillon on the radio version, but was passed over for the television series due to his portly physique not fitting the image that the network wanted for the Marshal. The role of Matt Dillon would eventually go to James Arness on the TV series. Arness was an intimidating figure at 6'7" inches and had starred in westerns before, making him a natural for the part. Arness was leery of playing the part, not wanting to commit to such a long-running television series, but his friend and mentor John Wayne urged him to take the role. Wayne was even willing to have a special introduction to the series premiere as an endorsement for Arness as the new face of the American Western hero. The casting choices were unlike the radio series, too. Dennis Weaver was selected for the part of Deputy Chester, whose character was unlike that on the radio, with a limping gait added to his character, making it one of his unforgettable characteristics. Amanda Blake played Kitty Russell, who was more glamorous and strong-willed. Milburn Stone played Doc Adams, a wise and at times rather grumpy figure. Interestingly, most of its most iconic actors initially turned down the show. For the role of Matt Dillon, John Wayne was an option, but said no to the role and suggested Arness. Dillon also considered Raymond Burr and Denver Pyle, but finally got rid of those options. Eventually, those who stayed defined the fate of the show. The show eventually recorded huge success, running an unheard-of 20 seasons from 1955 to 1975 on television, thereby making it one of the longest-running scripted primetime TV series. The successful crossing over to television from radio marked a turning point in the history of American media, and with this show, its cast and characters became iconic symbols of the Western genre. As Gunsmoke underwent its transformations for 2 decades between 1955 and 1975, it constantly met various challenges, one of which was the shift in public tolerance of the show, the exit of the cast, and sponsorship issues, among others. Gunsmoke was originally a pioneering show that attacked the raw grime of the American frontier, where violence appeared to be a necessary means of survival. But as the 1960s progressed, however, public sentiment about violence in the media began to change. The darker elements of the show thus came increasingly under fire as the Vietnam War and rising concerns about violence in media worsened. To adapt, Gunsmoke cleaned up the violence on screen and shifted the focus toward more character-driven storylines. Instead of gunfights and outlaws, the show started delving more into interpersonal conflicts, moral dilemmas, and the inner lives of its lead characters. The result of this evolution was that Gunsmoke remained relevant to an even larger audience, while also silencing complaints about the show's increased violence. Episodes were more about compassion, redemption, and justice, with enough action to still be a Western. Also, over the course of its 20-year run, there were some major cast changes made to Gunsmoke. The first to go was Dennis Weaver in 1964, who had played the affable, odd deputy, Chester. Weaver wanted to explore other acting avenues and didn't want to be typecast in Westerns alone. He was written out by having Chester simply leave Dodge City. It also added Ken Curtis as Festus Hagen, a new deputy who was gruff and humorous, thereby adding another character to the show. Amanda Blake played saloon owner Kitty Russell and left the show in 1974 after 19 seasons, due to a number of personal and professional reasons. Milburn Stone remained with the show as Doc Adams until the series ended, but poor health throughout that period sometimes kept him away from the screen. Gunsmoke also had to face changes in sponsorship. It was originally sponsored by L&M cigarettes. During the 1950s and 1960s, cigarette companies were fabulously integrated into TV advertising. In 1971, the Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act banned cigarette adverts from television. Hence, L&M needed to go as a sponsor. Gunsmoke, much like many other shows in its era, suddenly found itself scrambling for new sponsors as the noose of tobacco ad revenue began to tighten upon the network. By the early 1970s, even Gunsmoke was beginning to slip. Changing tastes and increasing competition from more contemporary modern fare within the Western genre made it difficult for the genre to sustain itself. CBS was not about to give up the series, however, and finally took Gunsmoke off of Saturday night in 1971, moving it to Monday nights for a new series. It was too little, too late, but the move did resuscitate the program's ratings a bit and allowed the series to continue on the air for a few years longer. Against innumerable hurdles, Gunsmoke kept climbing and became a continuing cultural touchstone that would forever mark American television and popular culture. Having survived for an incredibly long time, and even changing with the times, enabled Gunsmoke to transcend its genre and become one of the most influential shows in television history. Much of the success of Gunsmoke, despite cultural changes, was due to well-thought-out character development. Matt Dillon, the stoic marshal played by James Arness, set the mold for a reluctant but heroic lawman, while characters such as Festus Hagen, Doc Adams, and Miss Kitty brought breadth and depth and emotion to the series. Almost all social issues of its time, from gray areas of morality to make it not just some ordinary shoot-'em-up Western, were tackled by the series. As the public started having growing concerns about violence, it really struck a balance, moving more into human drama and character conflict, all contributing to its success. Gunsmoke is deeply rooted in popular culture. It helped develop the genre of the Western and set a standard of realism and intricacy that many series would later work with. The show also began to run on a new concept along the line. Characters evolve and grow throughout, foreshadowing serial storytelling that dominates modern dramas today. Matt Dillon became one of the very first true anti-heroes in TV, with his tough, rough-around-the-edges, deeply human characteristics. It set the stage for later protagonists of series such as The Sopranos or Breaking Bad. This series left its mark by achieving several milestones. When it finally ended in 1975, Gunsmoke had run for 20 consecutive seasons, making it the longest-running scripted primetime drama, which it retained for over 40 years, until Law & Order SVU outdid it in 2019. In all, 635 episodes were aired, which is incomparable with any television series, and even today it is considered among the longest-running television dramas. However, the success of Gunsmoke was not relegated to television ratings. The show earned several awards throughout its run. In 1957, the series earned a Primetime Emmy Award for Best Dramatic Series, firmly placing it as a critical success among its status as a favorite. James Arness earned multiple Emmy nominations for the role of Matt Dillon, and Milburn Stone in the role of Doc Adams took home an Emmy in 1968 for Best Supporting Actor in a Continuing Drama Series. The show had many other nominations in acting, directing, and technical categories throughout the years and truly represented excellence in each category. Indeed, it is undeniably part of our cultural legacy. It spawned literally hundreds of westerns in its wake, but none matched its critical and commercial success. Matt Dillon emerged as one of the most enduring manifestations of justice and the law, while the phenomenal success of Gunsmoke proved a television series could indeed make it both literally and figuratively through the ages, evolving with the times while retaining its core identity and changing tastes. Gunsmoke stands as one of the cornerstones of American television history, remembered as much for the endurance of the show itself as for the pioneering force it proved on the medium. Even though Gunsmoke had an unrivaled streak of success, some viewers and critics alike have pointed out mistakes in the show, not just with respect to historical accuracy, but also as it pertains to the period setting of the late 19th century. Although the series tried to portray life as it would have been in Dodge City, Kansas during the 1870s and 1880s, it certainly was not beyond letting certain anachronisms slip through, many of which have only recently been spotted by those who paid closer attention to the happenings. One inconsistency was in the character of U.S. Marshals, such as Dillon. Though U.S. Marshals existed during that period, the scope of their operation was more general and essentially dealt with federal matters, such as enforcing federal laws and arresting fugitives. Dillon's job of keeping peace locally and dealing with minor, everyday disputes was more characteristic of a sheriff, which did not precisely correspond to the role of a U.S. duties of marshal in the state of Kansas at the time. Looking closer, another area where Gunsmoke did not always stick to its historical context was costumes and hairstyles. Those characters of the show, especially female ones, from time to time sported fashions that reflected the 1950s and the 1960s when the show was filmed rather than the late 19th century. For example, Miss Kitty, played by Amanda Blake, wore makeup and hairstyles that seemed more applicable to mid-20th century America rather than to a frontier town. This gave certain episodes a more modern feel, pulling viewers out of the carefully constructed Western world. Also, the language and dialogue some of the characters used did not completely coincide with the date. Slang or phrases that sounded more contemporary would often creep into the script, though generally the show's creators did try to capture the speech patterns of the Old West. These slips may not have been glaring for the average viewer, but to fans who are more historically minded, they could be a distraction. The means of transportation used also showed a flaw in historical accuracy. Many episodes feature characters riding on trains that would not have existed in Kansas at the time. Although the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869, its expansion into the more rural areas like Dodge City took time, hence creating certain anachronisms regarding the rail routes or modernized train cars that existed on Gunsmoke. While such mistakes detracted little from the entertainment value of the show, it also outlined pretty clearly the hard work of maintaining perfect historical consistency across such a long-running television series. Despite this fact, Gunsmoke remains one of the favorite shows. These bloopers are just minor hitches in an otherwise impressive legacy. Eventually, Gunsmoke ended abruptly after running strong for 20 years. At the time, it was one of the longest-running primetime dramas in television history. The final show came as a surprise to not only the viewers but also to the cast and crew. CBS abruptly canceled the series without a formal farewell episode, leaving many storylines unresolved. This decision was part of a larger effort on the part of CBS to retool its lineup and keep up with trends by shedding many of its older, established Western series. Other classic Western series, such as Bonanza and The Virginian, were by this time also beginning to show their age, as the genre itself was slowly dying out in favor of more modern city-based series. But for a show that never really had any resolution, the impact of Gunsmoke left its mark on both history and television and popular culture. Undeniably, the change it brought forth influenced not just future westerns themselves, but also television dramas in general. These influences were seen in long-running character developments, complicated storytelling, and toward realist approach to life in the Old West. The usage of gray-shaded characters and multifaceted story arcs was unprecedented in television for developing very engaging tales. No character built like Matt Dillon, as played by James Arness, had ever been. He was a hard, law-abiding marshal whose vulnerability and humanity made him an instantly loved cultural icon. This archetype would go on to influence future TV heroes who had similarly flawed characteristics, but who were just as deeply devoted to justice. One of the more notable shows that Gunsmoke influenced was Bonanza, which started its 19-season run in 1959 and ended it in 1973, thereby becoming another icon on television. Though this new show was decidedly more family-friendly than Gunsmoke, it emulated its predecessor with deeper emotional storylines rather than just action alone. The Rifleman and the Virginian also borrowed the mode of Gunsmoke in peopling itself with convoluted, morally confusing characters, each series peeling further down into the inner psyche to find the motives behind its main character's actions, which was a major characteristic of Gunsmoke. Further rooted in the Western genre, Gunsmoke would go on to have its influence in many serialized storytelling methods also adopted by dramas such as Hill Street Blues and NYPD Blue. These shows utilized the formula developed in Gunsmoke, which involves developing character stories over long arcs, rather than wrapping up issues in single episodes. The anti-hero trope, in which protagonists were deeply flawed yet honorable, was taken up in shows such as The Sopranos and Breaking Bad. Each in his own way, Tony Soprano and Walter White reflect many of the same complexities as Matt Dillon's character, tough but morally ambiguous, clouded by personal demons. Apart from what it did to character-driven storytelling, the popularity of Gunsmoke proved that one of the keys to the longevity of television series might be their ability to evolve with cultural and social changes. When it first began, it was the heyday of westerns, and it took some twists and changes in tone and content to take it into relevance through 20 years of changing tastes. This is also evidenced by more modern, long-running series like Law and Order, which also changed with the times, yet at their core still expressed motifs of justice and morality. Ultimately, it didn't matter that Gunsmoke was canceled unexpectedly in the first place. It laid the groundwork for a great deal of the serialized, character-driven drama that would follow, a legacy carried over to this day as television storytelling continues to take its shape. When Gunsmoke ended, its actors moved on with their lives and were committed to other engagements. After seeing James Arness play his role, it is almost impossible to imagine another actor as Marshal Matt Dillon. And though he had other starring roles, Gunsmoke had always been a huge part of his career. He revisited his character during a series of Gunsmoke TV movies during the 1980s and 1990s. Following the end of the show, Arness had lived a quiet life in California on his ranch. He died at age 88 in 2011 as one of television's greatest Western heroes. Next, Amanda Blake was an actress who played the iconic Miss Kitty Russell and continued to act for many years in various TV roles and movies. Besides that, she was involved in animal rights activism and was a charter member of the Arizona Animal Welfare League, dedicating most of her later years to the cause of wildlife protection. Blake later died of complications due to AIDS in 1989 when she was 60, an event quite shocking to many of her fans. Milburn Stone, playing Doc Adams, was also one of the consistent favorites, a gruff, kind-town doctor. He pretty much retired afterward due to health problems. Stone had been an avid fisherman and spent his later years just enjoying a quiet life. Stone died in 1980 at the age of 75 from a heart attack. These are just a few of the actors, and we hope to bring you more in future episodes. Let's discuss your thoughts about the show in the comments, and we hope to see you in our future videos.